These presets are lame. This needs to be fixed. I will have satisfaction. Satisfaction guaranteed. With these two hands, I will build new presets. Presets that aren't lame. But always remember, no matter how many patches you make, nothing can patch the emptiness that you feel inside your soul. Except cocaine. Let me show you something. Let me show you something right here. I'm trying to come up with a catchphrase for this channel. I don't know, I'm still working on it. I'm still workshopping it. Let me show you something. At first glance, this is a pretty normal patch. Okay? You got oscillator A, boom. Square wave, sync to B. We also say boom on this channel now. Oscillator B's got the triangle and the sawtooth, more or less at the same frequency. Pretty normal sounding, right? But here's where it gets a little bit fancy. So the amp's envelope is I've got it kind of doing this thing. It's hard to explain, but I've got the decay in the middle-ish, so you've got a shortish kind of initial note. But then you turn the sustain all the way down and the release at about halfway, and you kind of have two different kinds of notes you can play. For short notes, you're kind of like... But if you need more length, you kind of do one of these. So it's almost like a marimba or something. The less you touch it, the more sound it makes. Kind of like my ex-wife. Eh? I don't even know what that means. The other thing that makes this... Well, okay, I've got to explain something. If you go to the Performance menu 1, so you hit Performance in 1, you can go to the LFO shapes here, and you can make the bottom one a sample and hold, which by default it's usually a square wave, but you can make it a sample and hold, and if you flip the LFO mod on like the oscillator, for instance, you got some pretty neat sounding sample and hold. And you can apply that to the filter or whatever. But in this patch, we're going with the oscillators. And it's just a more, you don't hear sample and hold modulating things very often. So it's just a more random way to do it. There's a couple of really basic patches that you need to have on hand, and one of them's a brass and one of them's a good string sound. So I need a good brass sound. I'm tired of flipping through all the presets and not finding any goddamn brass. I just need some 80s ass brass, all right? I'm not asking a lot. But luckily, it's a pretty easy thing to dial in. We're going to use both oscillators, and both of them have sawtooth and a square. The pulse width on one of them is pointing straight at 3 o'clock, and the other one is straight at noon. We need a little bit of modulation. So oscillator B is going to be modulating oscillator A just slightly at 1. And then we also need a little bit of LFO. I'm not sure if we're on the triangle or the sine wave, but it doesn't really matter. And that's just modulating the oscillators. So here's the speed. And then you just dial it so that it's just affecting it a little bit. As far as the filter goes, got a little bit of resonance. We don't want the brass to be too bright. That's what the strings are for. So it's cutting pretty deep at 3 here. We're at half keyboard tracking. The envelope is set fairly heavy at 2. And then a good brass has to have a pretty slow attack on the filter's envelope. So that's at 5. And a pretty sizable decay at about 8. You want the sustain to stick around a little bit, so that's there. And then no release, or maybe a little bit of release, but not a lot. And then the envelope for the VCA is pretty much the same decay as the filter, but you want the sustain lower and the release a little bit higher. So it's just kind of, you can hear the filter just kind of gently wowing open and kind of just closing slowly. Okay, so I'm throwing the entire kitchen sink at this one. We need a string sound, and it's easy enough to make a synth sound like a string, that's no problem. You can dial that up in 2 seconds. But trying to make one that's different and a little bit more interesting than a Selena string, that takes some doing. So first off, we're starting at a square wave, so we can put some pulse width modulation in there. We've got oscillator A at full blast, oscillator B at half-ish. And the reason you do that is, in general, you want one oscillator to be dominant over the other one. Otherwise, if they're the same volume, they kind of interfere too much. But if they're at slightly different volumes, one kind of wins out, and it's just a little less muddy. And I just kind of pointed the pulse width to the right, 3 o'clock-ish, whatever. So the first thing is, I got the Polymod on the filter. We got that at about 6. Just gives it's just giving the filter some movement. And then the other thing is, I got the LFO modulating the pulse width and the oscillators. So just another way to get some movement, and I really like the sound of pulse width kind of moving a little bit. It's kind of an interesting color you can add to things. And we've got the filter cutoff at 5. Yeah, a little bit of resonance. Envelope at about 2. And here's what the filter envelope is doing. So the filter is more or less following the VCA's envelope-ish, but with, releases up all the way. Probably the most important thing to a string patch is the VCA envelope. You want the attack to come on really slow. And then, the decay hangs around for a long time. And then the release is about halfway. Just when you take away that note, you want it to be pretty slow. That's just how strings kind of work. Now, it's probably not the most realistic string sound, but I think it's an interesting string sound. And then finally, sometimes a chorus can do wonders for a string sound. And some delay. A little bit of chorus, a little bit of delay, really kind of ties the patch together, if you will. That's it. Strings, done. Yeah. I don't even know what to call this. It's kind of like a lo-fi electric piano or something. It's like an electric piano going through a wobbly VCR. So oscillator A has got a triangle and a square. Oscillator B is just a square, and that's at about, halfway-ish. We've got the polymod affecting the filter, and that's all the way up. And then you've got a very piano-ish VCA. It's just like a half decay, a third sustain, half release. And then the filter is kind of set to just open real quick, and then you can see what's going on with the filter envelope. Cutoff is below 5. Envelope at 1. Resonance at 6. Here's the thing that really makes the patch shine, and that's the modulation. You got the modulation affecting both the oscillators and the filter. And I've got this on a sawtooth. To change this to a sawtooth, all you got to do is hit Performance 1, and that gives you your LFO shape menu. And the sawtooth, just the upward motion of that is just a very nostalgic vibe for me. I don't know why I'm doing this with my hand. And the other thing that's going on with this patch, first off, the aftertouch. If you go to Performance 8, you can turn up the aftertouch settings on the frequency, the amp, the LFO. So you can make it so the aftertouch affects the LFO or the VCA or the VCF. Generally there's two kinds of touch. There's good touch and there's bad touch. And I don't know which one aftertouch is. If you're playing a piano kind of patch, you might want a little bit of velocity. You hit the performance button and then 7, and you can just scroll through. You can turn up the velocity on the frequency, so the filter will open up more the harder you hit the keys. But it also affects the VCA, which is what I'm after. In fact, I've got that turned up all the way up, so it's kind of like... just gives you a more realistic piano type of vibe when you do that. And that's kind of cool because that comes in handy. That comes in handy for certain patches. I'm a bit of a sucker for a nice glidey poly synth sound. I don't generally like it that much on mono synths. I mean, sometimes it's okay, but I love a nice glidey poly synth. So the first thing is oscillator A is a square wave, and it's synced to oscillator B. A little bit of pulse width going on right here, like 6 or so. It's like the frequency is way low. When you sync oscillator A to B and it's syncing really low notes, you get this kind of weird like splatty sound. I don't know, it's just kind of nice. Oscillator B is got saw wave and a triangle. And then the thing about this patch that really gives it its character more than anything is I've got a square shape LFO kind of affecting everything. So all switches are pulled up. I'll show you an extreme setting. And then you just give it like, I don't know, a quarter note of that. To me, it sounds very robotic sounding. Instant robotic. So the keyboard tracking is on full, just a tiny bit of resonance, and then I had the cutoff all the way open. But you cut it off and it kind of sounds nice too. A little bit of envelope on one. Really, just a little bit of attack on the filter, pretty healthy decay, and a pretty healthy sustain, and then no release. And then the amp is kind of similar. Decay, except decay is all the way up. But for the most part, it's pretty similar. And then the final touch is you just turn up the glide.